Thanks to all of you for coming to New York to join us for this conversation. We really appreciate it. I'm going to start and go this way. Monique, I'm going to start with you. You're going to be my context person for this session, okay?
Okay.
With the large looming baby boomers aging, how is this going to, or what is the most direct way this is going to affect the way people work and the idea of work?
Well, the most interesting thing that's happening right now is that a lot more people in their 60s are working. So, and it's a record high. And what's unusual is that it's kind of, we're at a very low point in terms of people in their 50s working. So there are two trends that are sort of seem to be at polar opposites from each other. And I think that they reflect both good and bad news. The bad news is that we don't do a good job of providing jobs for people who lose their jobs in their 50s. And that's just scary if you do, and I think some people on this panel are going to talk about that. The good news is that some people are finding interesting jobs to do and want to stay employed, and these are called encore jobs or whatever, into their 60s, and they enjoy that, and that's considered a good thing. The thing that I'm worried about is that we hear a lot in kinds of panels like this about the good news jobs, the turning into a contractor, working part-time, doing something you really love, being able to afford to sort of downsize. But what we also hear about the flip side of that is there's a new book out called Nomadland by an author called Jessica Bruder.
We were just discussing
Oh,
that.
yeah. And it's about the bad kinds of jobs that happen when you really just don't have anything in your 401k, and especially after 2008, the downturn, a lot of people don't have much in their 401k, and so now they're doing things like swabbing bathrooms in campgrounds or working at Amazon. And so we're seeing a lot of people working. It's both a good news story and a bad news story.
It's interesting, we're talking about 2008, 2009 for this particular baby boomer generation. It really affected them in a way that we really hadn't seen before. So my question, I want to talk about that a little bit, but also the question is it responsible in a way to say, hey, follow your bliss, open your cupcake store to that generation at this point?
Well, I mean, some people are doing surprisingly well. The very top, like the top 10 or 20%, yeah, go ahead. I think we have enough cupcakes, but that's fine. But it's everybody else. I mean, the 2008 downturn basically knocked about half of people's net worth for people who are pre-retirement. I mean, it really just it was a once in a lifetime thing. Nobody could have planned around that. And there's been a rebound. Asset prices have gone up, stock market's doing well, and house prices have gone up. And yet most people still have not come close to recovering what they lost. So most people are really looking at even if they had saved a lot, and most people have not. So the other part of the story is that the average person really doesn't have much of anything in terms of retirement savings. So if that's one of you, you're in good company. But for the people who did, they lost a lot of it, and most of them have not recouped.
Avery, you were a novelist, and if I had asked you 20 years ago what you'd be doing in 2017, how would you have answered, and how is that different from what you're doing right now?
Well, I think I very clearly would have answered that I'd be teaching in academia and writing books, and that's what I trained for. That's what I grew up doing, basically. I come from an artistic family, so and it's also a large Southern family, which means that I grew up surrounded by adults, sitting on a wide veranda with slow-turning fans, and the adults would be in rocking chairs telling stories.
Oh, you are a writer.
Wait till I have a drink. So the oral tradition was really big, and it just became a natural occurrence that I went into being a writer, and some of that might have been tweaked along by the popularity of John Boy at one point. But I really planned for a career in academia, but there was always another side that was not writerly. It was more active. And what I mean is that when you're a writer, you basically observe the world a lot, and you see how other people behave, and you try to understand them. But every so often, you say to yourself, look, I'm sitting in a room all my life talking about things that don't happen or things that other people did, and I want to get in the game. You're not even in the stands when you're a writer. You're in like the locker room. So I wanted to get out there and get mud on the uniform. And so I began doing entrepreneurial startups. Ideas that came to me and that I talked to a few people about, and they really caught on. And I never would have imagined that I'd be doing this, because the technology didn't exist, the platform didn't exist, and even to my great surprise, when I go around Charlottesville and talk to people about what we're doing at Here's My Story, I'm a writer, I'm not technological, but I was catching people on their back foot. You want to do what?
Explain to people what Here's My Story is.
Yeah, now let's see if it works here. You want to do what? What we do is we bring history to life in all the places where people don't expect to find it. So let's imagine you pull up to a battlefield and you'll see old technology in front of you. You'll see a cannon and a plaque and a meadow. And you can imagine the kids rolling their eyes. With Here's My Story, what you'll see is a ping on the phone. You hold the phone up and a soldier appears on the phone and he says, I'll show you where they shot me. They cut my leg off in that building, come on. And as you turn your phone, you don't see the meadow, you see a Matthew Brady landscape, smoking, ruins, and you follow people into the past. So we've created this with an eye on national parks and on school children who've lost a sense of history, but also on those stories that go unheard. And I mean the little person of history. I don't mean the general on the horseback. I mean the guy holding the reins or someone else. So our first product is in the Apple Store, and it's a location-based learning experience centered on Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. And when you arrive, your phone will ping, and you will be asked to take a mission that requires you to travel into the past. And you arrive and you discover that you're just hours away from John Brown's raid happening, and you've got to get involved one way or the other.
What was it like for you to make that turn from being a novelist, a writer, someone on your own, typing away, to having to embrace technology and learn a whole new language?
Well, that's a great question. I would back up a little bit and say that the content delivery itself was the first hurdle, because the idea of doing AR figures and VR and technology was rather out there in the culture. But the difference was that I began with a more old-fashioned model of videos or storytelling. But it turned out that on a practical level, when you're doing a startup, it was brutally expensive. I mean, it was $500,000 to shoot anything around Harpers Ferry for several days and get it cut together. And if we did have it cut together, it would be about 10 minutes worth of video with reenactors. And of course, reenactors can be problematic. So
That's diplomatic.
right. So the next phase was when I began working with a new creative team. We began thinking about interactivity and the idea of gaming rather than passive video experiences.
Did you know anything about gaming before this experience?
No, my last experience with an electronic game was Pac-Man or something like that. And I was like, gaming? Well, you mean those kids that are like subsumed in the gloom for 10 years? And yeah, that's exactly what they mean. And I've seen a number of those games over a number of shoulders, and sometimes they're just mind-blowing, really, truly mind-blowing. So we went in that direction, and we went in the direction of a graphic novel for illustration. The cost came way down, and instead of making 10 or 12 minutes of video, we were able to make 6.5 hours of gaming experience in multiple legs and journeys. And instead of introducing 5 characters, we're able to introduce 30 characters. And these are real people from history. So the kids will run around the park and they'll encounter a little girl who spooks them out, and they will discover on the way home in a reveal that that's Annie Marmion, who was 10 years old and wrote a journal about being bombed and surviving in the streets of Harpers Ferry. And that gives them chills, and it inspires them to learn more, read more, and encounter more.
Liz, I want to bring you in this conversation. You have a Harvard MBA. You own your own condo. Yet you also found yourself at one point in your life, in recent years, in danger of having your electricity cut off, and considering using food stamps. Explain to people what happened to you. You decided to go out on a venture of your own business, which was what many people hope to do, and you took the risk, but the risk seemed to be lead to something a little more catastrophic than you expected.
So let me start by saying that my book is based on my lived experience. And I wrote it because in my friendship circle, what had happened to me, which is being someone with career choice and significant income, and then hitting a wall in 2008 from which I did not recover the way that I expected. So one of the things that happened, because I have all the props and credentials, like you said, and went out after Harvard. Harvard, one of the things they teach you is, to be an entrepreneur. And then when you have investors, you're going to put skin in the game. And skin in the game means your own money. So when you start an entrepreneurial venture, you don't think it's not going to succeed. And my business, in fact, went on for a number of years. But it was not as successful as I had hoped. So when I came out of it, I had used a lot of my savings in that venture. And when I first came out, this was before, sort of, let's say around 2002, not a big problem. I thought I would find something, and I did actually find something fairly quickly. It was not until the Great Recession where I lost 2 consultancies within 6 months that took me from a very significant salary to 0. So I'm thinking I'll do what I did before. I've got this fabulous background. And then my network was not working because now I'm in my, late 50s. And I was not getting the traction that I was used to getting. I was not getting called back. I was applying a lot of places. And the faking normal part of my title is around, I still had the clothes, still lived in the place. I could still appear like I was okay even when I wasn't. And finally, friends, we started to talk candidly about what was happening. Because you started to notice people declining invitations, or they would, order the mineral water instead of the glass of Chardonnay. Or people who always looked a certain way started to look a little bit worn down at the heels. So when we talked candidly, that's when mask came off, told the truth about what was happening. I wrote an essay about what it felt like to land here. What does it feel like when your plan A doesn't work? And you're looking at all that rubble and you're trying to figure out a plan B. Because the thing now is the longevity bonus means we're going to live till we're well into our 70s and 80s. So if you're struggling at 55, 57, 60, you got a long time to try to put this together.
What is it about that age that this happened to you, when this happened to you, when the bottom fell out, that you think is so difficult to recover from?
One of the things, there's actually quite a lot of data now that says if you're sort of mid-50s and you're out of work for more than 9 months, your chance of getting reemployed at a job equivalent to what you left drops by 50%, and it continues to go down after that. So this is, I think, just clearly an age discrimination issue which looms large and is, we're starting now to have this conversation.
I want to go back to you when you're talking about context. We've heard a lot about savings, people having to tap in their savings, depleting their savings. This all goes back to about the year 1983. Explain to folks what happened in 1983. It's going to be an unintended consequence.
Well, a lot of people think we have 401ks, and this was something that was passed by Congress, and therefore it must have been planned. And in fact, it's a complete accident of history. There was some, basically, to make a long story short, there was this minute change that nobody thought anybody would notice in the tax code. And a consultant for banks looking at deferred compensation thought, hey, we can use this to give a little bit of extra money, tax deferred, to some Wall Street workers, basically white collar financial workers. And, this has clarified whether or not they have to pay taxes on it now or pay taxes on it later. And we might be able to, actually have an employer match, and that'll, make sort of sweeten the pot. And so the guy who figured this out, his name was Ted Benna, he never thought that he was inventing a new kind of retirement plan or that this was going to replace pensions. The people he was working with had pensions, and he just thought this was a supplemental, thing. It's kind of, in the financial industry, as we know, that people have all kinds of different ways of getting paid that are not for normal people. But very, very rapidly, once this started, they started replacing pensions. So I don't want to make old-fashioned traditional pensions look too good. At no point in time did all workers have them. It was always about half of workers, a little bit more, but sort of the cliched family was, one person with a pension, and then maybe the wife didn't, so a teacher married to a construction worker, or, somebody, so somebody would usually have a pension, and right now, retirees still have a lot of traditional pension income. But very, very rapidly, once employers realized that they could basically shift all the risk and a lot of the cost of retirement onto workers, they did. And it makes sense. In some ways, it made sense because what we were also seeing is that fewer and fewer companies could really imagine paying pensions decades and decades into the future. So the defined benefit pension plan was problematic in the private sector for many smaller employers. This sort of replaced it. But it's not like we were teaching people in school or, how to do this, or it wasn't like it was well planned. There are a lot of fatal flaws in the 401k system. It's very, the tax benefits are upside down. The wealthier people do better. They, a lot of employers don't even have a match, or, can suspend it at any time. And also just the basic fact that people are having to figure out how to invest their money, how to save their money, how to spend their money in retirement. And none of us were prepared for that.
Avery, one of the ways you were able to get your business off the ground is you became part of a incubator program at the University of Virginia. Tell me what that was like and how important that scaffolding was like. And what was it like to also be in the startup culture with people half your age?
Yeah, wow. Well, here's another novel. It was terrific. And my partner at the time, Stefan Bechtel, is a writer. And when he and I joined the iLab at Darden, we were the old guys in a room, and we were both book writers, which meant that we were technologically behind the curve, and we were culturally outside the curve. And by that I mean that we spoke as writers, and we would have exploratory conversations. And it seemed to me that everybody in there, who's a good deal younger, spoke in pitch decks. So they would be saying, this is me, this is my brand, this is what I'm all about, are you in? We'd be like, huh? And so we had a more rambling process. And in fact, I remember the very first day, after the introductions and the welcomes and all that, everybody sat down, flipped open their laptop, and began typing. And Stefan and I looked at each other and said, what in the world are they doing? How do you actually begin to start a company? So a lot of them were business students, so we were actually behind the curve in a lot of respects. But we got going very quickly and latched onto our first client very quickly within the first week by simply visiting a site and looking at what they did not have. And that's where we stepped into our advantages, because as journalists and reporters, it was very easy for us to do the journey mapping phase with people and just interview them and come to understand what was missing in their lives and what we had on our palette of options could be helpful to them.
Okay, I'm going to send out the microphone in just a moment. I want to follow up with Liz. Hearing about Avery having this opportunity at the incubator, I thought about something in your book. You talked about resilience circles, how important it is if you find yourself in this position to create a family or a unit where you can help each other, because you really do need help and you need a place to be.
So it's crazy making to land here. And particularly when we're not having the conversations about this sort of seismic shift that we're in the middle of, and we don't talk publicly about the pain that we're in. So what was so helpful to me is having a few friends that I could tell the truth to. That there's one friend, we borrowed the same $300 back and forth. With 12 times, it doesn't, when she had money, I had money. But you will have hard times when you land here. It is a big hit to your self-confidence if you've been working your whole life, if you've been, had job and title and income. So the resilience circle is where I could go, where people could, if I was feeling wobbly, could tell me the truth about my talent and my capability, could remind me who I was, and I could do the same. Also, there are resources out here, but if you're in a place of despair and you're feeling beat down and kind of alone, you don't even have the energy to go out. So when a group of you start to talk together, one person will hear of something and then tells the rest of us, or you'll hear of something and you'll share it. because I really feel that the cavalry's not coming. There's no big bailout in the works here for us. And so, to have a chance at something, I'd say, other than being old and poor in America, we're going to really have to help each other. And so resources, you're hearing about some of them today, but you have to have the, the wherewithal, the scaffolding, as you say, around you to be able to access them. And that's what I think the resilience circles can do.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Right there.
Hold the mic.
Oh, hold on. Thank you very much. I just want to inform everybody, I'm the United Nations representative for Seroptimus International. Tomorrow, October 5th, United Nations International Day of Older Persons. Theme this year, it's interesting how we have this today, stepping into the future, tapping the talents, contributions, and participation of older persons in society. It will be, everything that we talked about today will be discussed tomorrow at the UN.
Something I think is interesting, I'll go over here in one moment, is that in your book that you talked about what you had to do in yourself, the inner work you had to do yourself, you said you had to get off your throne.
Right.
Which I thought was really self-aware.
Yes.
What did that mean?
So if we're not going to make the money that we're used to, you're going to get offers that are just going to make you angry. You're used to making a certain amount of money. And so getting off my throne was this sense of, and I tell a story of a very good friend of mine came to me and she said, I have an opportunity to do some organization work. And I thought she meant kind of what President Obama was doing in Chicago. She meant organizing somebody's closet. And I said, Juan, I'm not doing that. She said, get off your throne. Money is green. So the general point I'm making is that you'll have to do bridge work, stuff that you will feel is below your talent, your skill, your gifts, sometimes to just make it to the next place, to allow yourself to survive. So I had to get off my throne. I got all these props and credentials where I'm taking then some assignments that I don't think I wouldn't have taken before.
We're going to take one last question, then I have one last for you.
Hi, I'm Claire Wan, doing retirement research at Urban Institute. So I wonder what kind of resources are missing to help people work in their older ages to find employment again and to start their businesses.
Can you take that one, Monique?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things we talked about just sort of obliquely here is age discrimination. And it's a very thorny subject, but it's been well documented. I mean, it's not something that's been much studied, but the studies that have been done out there where they mail in, applications and then they find out that they're getting 40% lower compensation, that kind of thing, that's obviously something that needs to be watched. I think that people hang on to jobs, but if they lose their jobs in their 50s, it's hard for the reasons that you mentioned. I also think that one of the things that's a bigger topic that I think has been talked about in other things is about healthcare costs. So if we can do something, I mean, I think a lot of things that makes people not, stay out of the workforce, or a lot of it has to do with healthcare. And we went some way towards fixing our healthcare system, but not entirely. And I think one fact that we haven't discussed, but that's not well known, is that even with Medicare, that people out-of-pocket costs for older workers, older seniors, is very high. And there's some talk of trying to subsidize that, because I think that that's some of the discrimination against older workers is prejudice. And some of it is statistical. I mean, if you hire an older worker, their healthcare costs are going to be higher. And even under the Affordable Care Act, that reduced some of that, but it didn't go away. So and then there's no easy way to do that, and I don't have a quick answer, I should say, because you also don't want to do something that sort of subsidizes older workers at the expense of younger workers. But at least we should take healthcare costs out of the work equation as one small proposal I would have.
We're going to go over time, but I want to let each of you have one piece of information you think that would help people.
I think one thing that's important is to not think this is just, as someone said backstage, the pesky little problem of boomers. Everybody is going to age is going to, have a longer lifespan. So boomers, we're just the first ones over the hill. I don't want to say over the cliff, over the hill. But you're coming up behind us. So as we are figuring out these problems, we're going to need you to help us because it's going to be happening to you very soon.
Avery, do you want to have one last thought?
Sure, yeah, I would just say, in Charlottesville, a lot of people introduce me and say that I've got a lot of tenacity for having pursued this as diligently as I have. For me, it's not tenacity, it's the joy of the discovery. I mean, it really is a form of rock climbing, and it's got, believe me, it's got existential peril underneath it all the time. This is something that really makes you wake up in the morning and makes you love life, to get out there and engage and change and be involved.
Monique, Avery, Liz, thank you so much for sharing your stories.